Hey, let me try a practice run at Clearing the Plains by James Daschuk. Having a whole block on this, so I'm just gonna talk about it roughly, generally, and we'll see what happens. Who knows? Maybe I'll chop all this stuff at the beginning and actually use this or not. So yeah, I'm here with the review of Clearing the Plains by James Daschuk, which is disease, politics, starvation, and the loss of Aboriginal life by James Daschuk, published by the University of Regina Press in 2013. The main takeaway about this book is that in the 1880s, the Canadian government used a policy of starvation to clear the plains of the native population for European settlement and the building of the Canadian Pacific Railway. Canadian Pacific Railway bringing in all those settlers, used this politics to shove them away on reservations, to marginalize them from the rest of Canadian society, economically, politically, and socially, and that the shameful state of First Nations health today finds its origins in how John A. Macdonald, the Conservatives, and the Canadians, the newly created Canadian society, was founded. We were founded on this policy of genocide, of deliberately clearing people off of lands, and setting up a lot of the rotten systems, the Department of Indian Affairs, the really terrible residential school program, everything used to designed to basically destroy the native peoples physically, socially, economically, just all that. The book can be divided into two parts. There's a sizable part of this book which is actually devoted to how disease, ended up coming into North and South America through the expansion of the European trade, the discovery of the new world. That basically, with trade, every time there's trade, there's disease, and the disease was massively disruptive to the native populations, completely, utterly destroying certain good giant hunks of it. What left had the peoples that left had a tendency to recombine, to form new societies that the native populations adapted, were doing great adaptations to react to this new kind of economic reality of the fur trade and things like that, and the introduction of horses into society. Horses which also carried with them the trade routes of that, coming up from Lake Mexico all the way up to the plains of Canada, carrying with them more disease vectors, and this actually, the combination of all this stuff, this is where you get the idea of what I think is kind of the stereotypical idea of the plains Indian, of native on horseback, who's solely hunting the buffalo. That this was a serious change from what actually was beforehand. And that just the idea that the peoples that we encountered on the plains of Canada weren't the natives that had been there from Paleolithic times, but were actually in a time sense, relatively new creations of the influx of disease and of trade and everything else, all the demands of trade that had happened before. So that's kind of that, and that I find that's a really useful part where Daschuk has kind of set the scene of, like, so this is how you have peoples on these plains who have fairly destabilized units, are living kind of subsistence lives, very kind of on the edge because of the overhunting demanded by the fur trade, by the markets outside of that are in Europe, and then when you have the collapse of the bison, sudden, just gigantic, just collapse after like hundreds of thousands of years of the bison being there, and suddenly, not being there any longer, and how that just devastated these people and turned them from kind of a more of a vital power to being basically dependent on the goodwill and the honesty of the newly formed Canadian government. The Canadian government, which legally needed to sign treaties with these peoples on the plains, to be able to bring in settlers. They needed legal framework that was to make it legal. So they entered into these agreements, agreements where the natives were like, we know the bison are going to die, or is on the way out. It's going to be extinct, and that we need to set up something new. The native peoples, wanting, as much as you can say globally, wanted to make a transition to agriculture. They could see that was going to be the new economy for Canada on the plains. They wanted that transition. They had also had kind of basically had a setup with the Hudson's Bay Company before that, where the Hudson's Bay Company said, like, in exchange for you working for us, we're going to kind of provide a certain amount of a social safety net, whether that is credit at the store, whether that is providing for kind of medical care and stuff like that when there was need. It's like they were saying, like, we don't want charity, but you are taking all, we're going to cede all this land to you. And as a result, you need to enter into an agreement with us that if there's famine, if there's privation, you are going to be there to support us, and you're going to provide us for training to get integrated into the agricultural economy that's going to be come up. What happens is that with the collapse of the bison, the Canadian government has all the power, and under John A. Macdonald, with actually a lot of pressure from the opposition groups, he implements a thing of basically giving them the very barest minimum of supplies because of racist attitudes of, oh, they're lazy. If we give them money, if we give them proper rations, they're going to be lazy and not work. And we're also going to withhold that unless they go where we want them to do. So they use food as a way of saying, you only get food if you go to the reservations. They use it as a method of control. Basically, rations were rotting in warehouses because the government, for either through racist ideas of we're only going to give you the bare minimum to keep you working, or through or through basically just once we've decided an area of land is going to be for the railway, all the land on there suddenly becomes very valuable to the Canadian government. We're moving you off of that so we can sell that land, and it becomes part of the white settler group. White settler interests are put well over top of the native groups there. So they basically broke all those treaty promises. The other thing that Dasychuk kind of really sets up here is, as I've said about the whole disease ravaging the area, this was a population that was extremely vulnerable, and keeping them at a starvation level combined with disease, at that point TB erupts and just kills great swaths of the population. So Canadian government is responsible for the massive deaths there. Pre-Canadian government, just basically having scientific ideas about like what's going on with disease. Europeans coming to North and South America, it's horrible. It's a horrible thing, but it's not this kind of an active, cruel, sadistic policy used for avarice. That said, once we get into the Canadian government and trying to clear these plains, that's most definitely what it is. So yeah, that's sort of what Dasychuk kind of sets up in these chapters. Now, it's like the focus of Dasychuk is most definitely his laser focus on all of this stuff. He is focused on the plains, and keeping it there, and keeping it on the native perspective. It's one of these things that, whereas in a regular history book, it's like, oh, the plucky voyageurs came into this area, or oh, they built the railway across. It's like this very much grounds it in a native perspective of, great, the more of these the settlers that show up, the more disease comes, the more we are destroyed by them. So that's that really benefits of like you feel kind of very immersed in uh, that the other side of history there. There's also just the thing of that Dastruck is it seems he's taking a lot of what's relatively newer research and bringing it together in one work, where he is kind of piecing together kind of a new picture of how natives what native society was like pre-contact, and through and all the way up until 18, like when Canada becomes a thing and becomes the player that displaces the HBC, and becomes the major player in the area, stuff like that. So it's that, and really does benefit. It does take a good while to get to the whole Canadian government's terrible culpability in what they've done and how they have set up Native people to fail. One of the things I should mention is the cumulative effect of how they shove Native peoples onto reserves and completely failed to actually train them in agricultural, also just actively banning them from the economic system. So basically marginalizing them in every way possible, so that these peoples, instead of being an active, active kind of integrated, parts of Canada, building to the economy, benefiting from the economy, they are marginalized and put on basically on starvation, on a horrible leash, in these reservations where they institute like the pass system, so you can't actually get off the reservation except without the permission of an Indian agent. It's like these are prisons that they put these people in. Very much the opposite of what the spirit of the treaties that the Canadian government signed. Yeah. So, and he also says he does this in a way that it's clearly written. There's not a lot of the kind of historian bafflegab speech. This seems to be a clearly written book in that sense of it's very readable that way. Now, kind of on the weakness side, it is very laser focused. So I found, as an ignorant dude, I needed to kind of consult a lot of other histories. I even read Canadian History for Dummies, just to get kind of a wider overview of what was going on, because this is a book that I think kind of assumes a certain level of readership, that you need to bring a certain level of awareness of Canadian and North American history to be able to kind of put it into perspective. And sometimes that may weaken things, because there's things that he doesn't address in the book because of his laser focus. Stuff like, what was the Canadian people's kind of attitude to the idea of having a social welfare net thing at this time. It's brought up that both the John A. Macdonald's Conservatives and the Liberals were very, very much like, this was not an era of giving support to people. That was only done by the church. The governments weren't in that business. So that is perhaps there's can be argued that is a part of why they failed so miserably to provide any social safety network for natives people, and simply just used it as a political tool to get their own goals. Have to say that it's also because it's deeply racist. Of these are savage native people that we can just shove aside, and their history dustbin, and they're genetically predisposed to disease, so that's just the reason why they're all dying off, not because of our actual policies. And it does take a long time to get to the heart of the book, because he is very kind of systematic in going through all the different sections, and that probably ties into kind of the organizational issues that I can have with the book, is that it's a book that kind of leaves it up to you to do a lot of work around the sides, whether you're giving yourself context for stuff, whether it's just sort of saying like, I'm telling you about all the stuff that happened before, so we can get to this point. It's published by the University of Regina, and I don't know if they were aware at the time exactly how big of a this is a book that really kind of made an impact on Canadian society. Got talked about in the newspapers, led to a lot of the reevaluation of what John A. Macdonald is as one of our founding fathers, and how that should make us feel as Canadians. But as a result, I found this is a buddy read with Sean the Book Maniac, and we spent a lot of chapters sort of organizing things. A lot of times there's just such an accumulation of data, of information, that we needed to kind of piece it together. Found we were piecing it together ourselves, whereas maybe a writer who's writing for maybe a little bit more of a general audience would have maybe pared some things back, would have organized things, kind of given us little pushes on how stuff, we had to kind of make those ideas for itself. All right. I'm going to pause here because I've done 15 minutes of it, and I'll see what I have and edit that down, and then probably add from there, probably give my general assessment, my general glowing review of it afterwards. But I think I'll stop there because I'm running out of steam, and also I probably need to organize my thoughts on that. Okay, good. More videos later, because I'll post this on my just general, my relaxing channel. Yeah, my relaxing channel. I'll post that there, as well as just transfer it over to the computer and chop it down and make it hopefully tighter. Or I'll look at it and go, wow, that was a good first run, and then I'll try it again, all in one flow. But it's good to know that I have something there at least. All right, more videos later.